don't worry. It is not a problem, it is not a mental disease, it is antar yoga. It is yoga that is coming from antar, from inside. She's not a cuckoo, she's perfect. And they kept saying, why do you do these things? No guru initiated you, how do you know it? She says, no, it comes on its own. So as it was the style at the time, Anandamayi gets married when she's 12 and 10 months with her Jew husband, Bholenath. He had a different name, but she named him Bholenath, and that's it. That's how it stayed. It's similar to Bholinath, one of the names of Shiva. He was 28. And after we spoke about Anandamayi's childhood in the previous meeting, today we'll speak about her life, her marriage life, how she starts to do spiritual practice, and how she attains the highest perfection. So as we mentioned already, when she was 2 or 3, when she would hear kirtan, when she would hear devotional singing, she would enter samadhi and her body would collapse lifeless. Her mother thought she's sleeping and tried to wake her up and tell her, look, why do you fall asleep? All the other kids are singing for God, and you? Yeah, she's becoming one with God. Later in her teenage life, when she would hear kirtan and feel people's devotion and love for God, she would start to roll on the ground in what is called bhavs. They are like devotional outbursts. And she would cry, and her body would freeze in all sorts of positions, and sometimes she would lie down and she couldn't move. She had all sorts of kriyas, all sorts of manifestations, the eyes, the tongue. And the neighbors, even in India, they freaked out. They freaked out. They thought she's cuckoo. So she would listen to kirtan from a distance and try to stay home. And when she would feel it starting, she would hide in her room and start to enter all sorts of divine states of consciousness. I would also probably freak out if we had here in the Mahasiddha kirtan somebody who would enter a state like that and could not move anymore, and the body would appear as a corpse. You can't blame them. It's not something that happens so often. Around that time, she started repeating Hare Bol, basically say the name of God. And she would enter in all sorts of asana, Siddhasana, Padmasana, Paschimottanasana. They would appear on their own. And then later, complex breathing exercise combined with a mantra, all sorts of yoga practices. She would start to see visions of Gour and Nitai. When she would hear the Bhagavat, the story, not the Bhagavad Gita, but the Bhagavat, the stories of the life of Krishna, she would see a light. And she said some of these lights she would then see for the rest of her life. Everything was covered in this light. She would lose consciousness of the body and this ecstatic joy. The husband, the family, everybody, even it's India, beginning of the 20th century, they freaked out. They would bring doctors and priests and pandits to check what's happening with her. And luckily, they had the right, not luckily, it's divine integration, they had the right doctors, the right pandits, and they told them, guys, don't worry. It is not a problem, it is not a mental disease, it is antar yoga. It is yoga that is coming from antar, from inside. She's not a cuckoo, she's perfect. And they kept saying, why do you do these things? No guru initiated you, how do you know it? She says, no, it comes on its own. At that period, she started doing very extreme regimes. So she was quite social, and she would go and clean everyone's house and do whatever is asked for. She was like this servant of everyone, very joyful, always happy, always doing and cleaning and arranging for the whole neighborhood and loving to socialize. But when she started with the sadhana, she was very, very attracted to that. And she gradually stopped her contact with the people and with the neighbors. She would only stay in contact with her close family and with her husband. And she would do all the house duties very well, everything super clean, and get water and clean and wash and cook and everything arranged. And when she would finish, she would practice. And she would normally practice the whole night, and then just before sunrise, she would eat, sleep a little, and start the next day, clean everything, do everything perfect. And like this, very, very little sleep for many, many years. And then the food regime started. She would have a kayal, like a divine impulse, only fruits. Okay, so for a while, only fruits. Yeah, this was before YouTube and all sorts of health books. It was needed for her purity, or maybe just needed to show an example. And then only rice, a few months. And then for a while, only 3 morsels, only 3 mouthfuls of food every day for many months. And then after that, only 3 grains of rice and 3 sips of water every day. And sometimes 15 days without water. And sometimes very long time without sleep. And she said, my body felt great. There was no problem. She was in a completely different state of consciousness. We cannot conceive even what and where she was. She was doing very complicated rituals. Some of the testimonies say that the objects of the ritual would appear in her hand, they would just manifest, and she would do. They were very, very poor, complicated rituals. People started asking her, can you do for us so-and-so ritual? And she'd say yes. And then she would make a very complicated yag, a fire ritual. She said, I would take leaves and write on them in 3 languages that I don't know, the right mantras, and place them where the fire should start. And then the ritual, I don't know if you know yag, it has like 100 stages with all sorts of very complicated mantras. This in Sanskrit, this in Tamil, this in Hindi, this in Bengali. Very complicated, and evoke that deity, and when you evoke that deity, bling, bling, bling with the bell, and throw the rice like this, and throw the turmeric like that, and make that shape with the logs. And everything she did perfectly. She just knew. She had no formal education in these things. She never had a physical teacher. And then in one incident, her cousin and her husband are with her, and she's in one of these very high states of consciousness. She's in a very, very profound state of meditation. And they go back and forth, and they're a bit pissed. They don't understand. They don't understand her. Even the doctors and pandits said it's good. They are conflictual. Her cousin, her family, her husband, they don't get it. She's so confident about it, but what does she know? And her cousin, a bit pissed, a bit playful, a bit mocking, asks her, who are you? And she writes in her testimony, or she explains in her testimonies to one of her disciples, from inside of me came this affirmation. Purna, Brahma, Narayan. Purna is the absolute. Brahma, the creator. Narayan, Vishnu, the preserver. Basically, I am the absolute, with form and beyond form. I am the infinite and the finite. And then Bodhinath says, and when will I get initiation? And she told him, on that month, on that day. And who will initiate me? I will. And then the cousin said, but is this the right day for initiation? Because the moon should be like this. And she said, the neighbor, he's an expert of astrology. Go and ask him, and you will see the moon is in that position, the sun is in that. Everything is perfectly aligned for initiation. She explains there with Rohini and so forth. So they bring the neighbor, and the neighbor brings his calculations, and it's all perfect, the day that she mentioned for the initiation. The neighbor asks her, who are you? She answers in the same way, I am the absolute, with and without form. And he's like, no, you are the devil, you are the devil. As often, if you see from the life of Teresa of Avila and other divine women, when they start to awaken such powers, some of the people consider them demonic for their powers, or diabolic. And she starts to laugh, and she says, no, what I'm saying is true. You are testing me. It is true. And he says, the neighbor says, yes, give us a proof, give us a proof. And then she smiles and she says, you want to see? Bring Bholanath here. Bring the husband here. And the husband sits next to her, and she touches him in the crown of the head, and he enters samadhi. He enters such a high state of samadhi, his body is completely paralyzed. He looks utterly lifeless, and he stays like that for many, many hours. His nephew comes home, the nephew was living with them, and he starts to cry. He sees his uncle there. He looks like a corpse, like a sitting corpse, and he cries, and the whole house freaks out. And the neighbor apologizes, and everybody apologizes, and they say, please bring him back, bring him back. So she touches his forehead again, and he returns, and that was like, point made. You understand now who I am, and especially Bholenath, from that moment, he understood. Now, in this stage, people start to see her as a guru. This last stage of our sadhana, she already starts to heal people. When she had a keyal, for example, somebody would come and says, look, our child, he's invalid and he's sick and his body is deformed, can you help him? And she said, from my lips came out, bring him here on Thursday. And then when the sun comes, she strokes his body, she strokes his body, and the boy is healed. When another one, a man, he cannot conceive with his wife for many years, he says, I believe in you. And she's just a child, nobody knows her, but he says, no, I believe. If I bow down and touch your feet, I will have a child. So he bows down and touches her feet, and he enters total ecstasy. He's rolling in total happiness. And when he comes back, he says, I've never been so happy, but I forgot to ask. Because you need to ask when you touch. And she said, no, it's fine. And he has a child. And then a very deceitful sadhu, so-called miracle worker, which was a fraud, came to her somehow, because by now she started having a reputation and he wanted to associate himself, get her blessing, get a few words. And she was very quiet, and he was like, yes, I have the paranormal powers of Kamalatmika and Bagalamukhi, two of the Mahavidyas, and I've done the sadhana and I help people. She listens quietly, and then she answers very angry. She says, you are a liar and a fraud. You attain nothing. You gave people these ornaments for a lot of money, and you yourself know they do nothing. You have no power. And he's like, quiet, quiet, quiet. No, quiet. You're a liar. And then he understands. She cracks his heart, and he starts to cry, and he bows down in front of her. She says, I'm sorry, you're right, I'm sorry, what shall I do? So she gives him a very complex tapas, very complex sadhana. She says, you must do this and do that, and repent for your sins and correct your ways. And he went from there, repenting with a new direction. She starts to have clairvoyance in this stage, and eventually she has the revelation of the Divine Self, Atman, and she realizes in this very tantric way, not the neti, not I'm not this and I'm not that, but the iti. I am this and I am that. From that moment, she is everything that she sees. A disease would come to her. She had clairvoyance. She would see the disease coming. She would sit in bed and she would hold hands with the disease and ask her, what are you doing? A disease is coming to this body. This body doesn't refuse anyone. Soon I will have fever. Everything was her. As the Self is revealed, after the revelation of the Self, she initiates. Bholenath, he goes to work in the office. She sends somebody and says, bring him here now. It's his initiation day. If he doesn't come, I go myself and I bring him. So he comes in the office, middle of the work day. She does the whole thing, the whole ritual. She gives him the mantra. He becomes a great practitioner himself. He asks her, who am I? And she says, Mahadev, a manifestation of Shiva. And towards the end of his life, he goes to the Himalayas with her as his guru. With the initiation he receives, he goes all the way to Mount Kailasha, attains enlightenment, and passes away over there. In the end of that stage, she enters silence. For 3 years, she doesn't speak to anyone but Bholenath, with certain exceptions. When she needed to speak, she had a ring on her finger, and she would make a circle called Kundali around her. and then she would speak from there. And when she would finish speaking, she would erase it. It's an imaginary circle. And then she would stay silent again for 3 years in order to crystallize this state, or simply to show other people the necessities of sadhana. It is not clear. The same with Ramakrishna. Why did he do so much sadhana? Was it a purification, or was it simply an example, or maybe both? Also with Christ, after the baptism, his 40 days in the desert, was it for sake of purification, or for example, or both? So this is the stage of Mahasadhana, and in the next lecture we'll speak about her first period as a guru, as the living master, and all the wonderful miracles and wonderful favors and wonderful teachings that she gave to the people. And then in the last lecture, the fourth one, we'll speak about her later days and the second stage of her teachings.
Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content on spirituality, Tantra and more.
And if you want to sign up for our online classes or for our retreats, you can see our website on the description below.